the title of the book, Leave the Kid Alone, is kind of gives the illusion that I was teased, and that's not the case. I was literally left alone. My parents were working, and my siblings as well. We just were wild. We were just allowed to run around the inn, do whatever we wanted.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Bucks Co-Living, the podcast that tells the great stories of Bucks County, the great people of Bucks County, and a little bit of history about Bucks County as well. Today I'm joined by Steve Zettler, author of the new book, Leave the Kid Alone, A Fractured Remembrance. Steve tells the story about himself as a 7-year-old, 7.5-year-old, about growing up at an inn that we all know, the Washington Crossing Inn, where it had movie stars, war veterans, local characters, mob bosses, maybe a little crime about that. But it's funny, it's nostalgic, it's heartfelt. Steve, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
No, my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Steve, I read the book, and it's a little cringy at times because it was a rough, but it was truthful, and it's not only about growing up in the 1950s in Bucks County, but the inn. The Washington Crossing Inn, as the inn that was referred to in the book. What was that like, moving in your family into that area?
Well, it was a great way to grow up. The title of the book, Leave the Kid Alone, is kind of gives the illusion that I was teased, and that's not the case. I was literally left alone. My parents were working, and my siblings as well. We just were wild. We were just allowed to run around the inn, do whatever we wanted. I was attached to the kitchen more than my siblings. They felt the kitchen was a little dangerous. I don't know what they thought it was. So, but the fact that my parents didn't raise me, I was raised by 5 kitchen help, 3 waitresses, and 3 bartenders, and those were my and Dave Redding, who was a African-American guy who worked the grounds and cut the grass and whatnot. These were the people who raised me. And that's all my lessons in life came from them. And these were the days, and I think this maybe still goes on in the Catskills, but the kitchen help was a room and board job. And these men who were, at the time, there was World War I veterans, World War II veterans, Korean War veterans. My great aunt Bertha, who owned the place at the time of this book, refused to allow anybody drink on the premises. Not the customers, of course, that was their business, selling booze, but the kitchen help was not allowed to drink. And the interesting thing is that a lot of these men came out to the inn on purpose. It was a little bit like their own personal AA, because they came out to Washington Crossing right away. They had a place to sleep and a meal, and were forced to go cold turkey right away. So some of them would last for years, and some of them would just last for 2 weeks, and they couldn't handle it and go back into Philadelphia and fall off the wagon. But they all had just great stories, and as well as the waitresses and the bartenders in particular. One of the bartenders, his day job was flipping the switch on the electric chair in Trenton. So there's just these personalities were larger than life. And the inn now does not have, I don't believe, guest rooms to rent, but they did back in my era there. And it was essentially a shack-up joint for New Yorkers. And so lots of Broadway people came down, and many of them were gay, because New Hope was right up the road, and that was a great gay enclave in Bucks County. And so that was something that we grew up with, and we didn't find it to be anything particularly unusual.
Yeah, it was a school of hard knocks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I read the story. It was funny. The one, I grew up in restaurants too. Like, so I families, they don't care about child labor laws. So
no, not at all. And once they find you have opposable thumbs, you're good to work.
You could bus tables, you could wash dishes. It was funny. The one customer, the client said, the showgirl, like, how do you know him as Herm? Like, your father. So Everyone, even though everyone knew him as Herm, but but how did you know him? Instead of his former name, you've been traveling across the country. You've been everywhere. You have a lifetime of stories, and with you and your wife, you're writing a lot of different things and actually appearing. Guys, we talked about this a little bit off air, but Steve was in The Wire, which is one of my favorite shows ever. The one off Columbo, which is something that like my grandma used to put on and I'd had to watch it. And then we still joke about this today about, one more question. You led this whole life across the country and across the world. And it always brought you back to Bucks County though. How long has this story been in your head?
The way it started, got kicked off. It hasn't been, I started writing it about 3 or 4 years ago, but my cousin, who is a wonderful filmmaker and writer as well, we were having lunch one day and she said, "Does it bother you that I still call you Stevie?" And everybody in my family called me Stevie. So it doesn't bother me at all. My brother-in-law, who's in his 80s, calls me Stevie. So it's just a family name. But it got me thinking back to the time when literally everybody called me Stevie. We had regular customers come into the inn all the time for dinner and lunch, and Stevie was there running around, and so that's how it started. And so I just thought back to this time when everybody I knew called me Stevie, and it was just nothing could go wrong. It was just a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And I will say the subtitle of the book, A Fractured Remembrance, it's a little misleading because it wasn't fractured. The fractured part of it is how much I remember and how clearly I remember it from being 7 and 8 years old. So some of the instances I had to look up. But one of the people who came down from New York quite a bit was Edward Everett Horton, who many people don't remember any longer, but he was a wonderful Broadway actor and was in all of these comedies where people had to wear black tie or white tie and tails. And would come down all the time, and he was wonderful with me and my sister and my little brother, great with kids. But later in his career, he was the voiceover artist for Rocky and Bullwinkle's Fractured Fairy Tales.
Oh,
So that's where the title comes from.
that's awesome.
This guy was so great, and I just need to honor him. So that's why it became A Fractured Remembrance.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I first, my dad used to make us watch Rocky Bullwinkle and Aesop's Fables and all that stuff back in the day. When remembering, I don't remember 7-year-old as much, but when coming back to remember your past, was it easy or was it something to reinvent yourself? Like, remembering some of the times, looking at it in a new perspective at your age?
It's interesting, and as I got into it, all this stuff came back to me. And there's my little disclaimer in the beginning of the book that all of the situations that are in this time frame, the book, the time frame is from me 7.5 to 8.5. Well, some of the incidents happened a little later in life, and some happened a little before. But I decided to just condense it all into 1 year. So that's how it played out. So there was some things that were a little bit later on in life. One in particular, when my mother decided to take us up to Stratford, Ontario, to the Shakespeare Festival, and we saw Merchant of Venice and Julius Caesar. And I remember this very clearly because it was the next year, not, but anyway, I remember it very clearly. And I remember one actor who just had me in stitches in The Merchant of Venice. He played Bassanio, and in Julius Caesar, they were in repertoire. And in Julius Caesar, he played Lucius. And he was just great and great sense of humor and everything. And so I decided to do some research on this. So I went to the Stratford Shakespeare Festival's website where they have the full cast on all of these things. And it turns out the actor who played both of those parts was William Shatner.
Oh, wow. He was just here.
There's a little Star Trek trivia there.
He was just here at the Oxford Valley Mall. So last week.
Right.
So yeah, it was a big crowd. So there was, still doing Priceline and but that's pretty awesome stuff. Seeing William Shatner in his prime,
Yeah. I mean, he's no, go ahead.
No, I was saying, like, that's got to be amazing. In the 1950s, Bucks County, the Washington Crossing Inn, looked a lot different than what it did today.
Yeah, I would guess. Yeah.
What do you miss? What do you love? What do you wish would have happened regarding Bucks County from that time?
Well, when I go out there, I guess what I miss the most is the landscape that has now been developed, and I think the development out there has been very tasteful. So I don't really have an issue with that. That's the way of the world. That's what's going to happen. But it really was, farms mostly. Between Washington Crossing and New Hope was nothing but farms. And one good friend of mine, who was my best friend when I was that age, she read the book and loved it, but she said, I had no idea this is what you did when you went home. Because she lived on a farm, and she just said, I assumed all of my friends, my grade school friends, went home and their mother made them dinner, and they did their homework and went to bed. She read it. She said, I had no idea this was what you did, because I would come home from school and I'd go straight to the kitchen and start hanging out with the dishwashers and the pot washers and the short order cooks and the waitresses and everything. And dinner, my mother didn't cook at all. So
especially on Mondays.
Yeah. So the inn was closed on Monday. So we would always go out for dinner on Mondays. My mother just couldn't cook or made no attempt to cook. So during the week, I would just go in the kitchen and get dinner. And depending on I could have prime rib every night because it was just carved off of the prime rib. So there was no big deal about that. I couldn't have a steak because it had to be, cooked, or lamb chops, or anything special that had to be cooked. But if it was chicken, the chicken was cooked, basically. So ham, all that stuff, turkey, you could just pretty much order what you wanted from the short order cook, and then go down and sit with the waitresses who had this little service table they had. And of course, cigarettes were just all over the place back then. And, in the kitchen, the cooks, everybody smoked. And, so was always an ashtray right next to the meat slicer, everything. And the waitresses smoked nonstop. And so you were always, bombarded with the cigarette smoke. But we didn't eat as a family, except when we went out for dinner at other restaurants in Bucks County.
Yeah,
and
checking out the competition, right? Like your dad said.
Yeah, my dad was big on checking out the competition, and he would just get up unannounced and walk right into their kitchen, and just see, what they were doing, and so he used to say, you can always learn something just by walking in unexpectedly. And I've done that myself as an adult. I remember my stepson's 21st birthday. The service was unbelievably slow, and it was his birthday, and I just picked this up from my dad. I just got up and walked into the kitchen and started reaming at the chef and saying, it was clear to me, having grown up in the business, it's clear to me that the chef and the waiter were having an argument, and so the chef was going to make the waiter pay by not giving his food in an expeditious manner. And so it was clear what was going on, and anyway, they ended up, this was at the Hotel del Coronado out in San Diego, which is this fabulous old hotel. And so finally the maitre d' came around and said, let me offer you a bottle of wine. And my stepson's younger brother said, order the $1,000 bottle of wine.
Of course.
And the maitre d' was,
that's what little brothers do.
So he comped the dinner, which is very
nice,
good of him. But anyway, but I have no, I have become my father. There's no denying it.
Well, that's a good thing, right? And not everyone wants to grow up to be their father, but then the retrospect, like, I'd be honored to grow up to be my dad. My dad was awesome and is awesome. Yeah. So, like, it's something that you grow up to. But listen, I wanted to get back to the Washington Crossing Inn. It's not only that family restaurant. It was Aunt Bertha and her two sisters. She had the Pipersville Inn and the Doylestown Inn as well.
Doylestown Inn, Pipersville Inn.
That's crazy.
Washington Crossing Inn.
That's awesome.
Yeah, my grandfather came over from Germany in the early 20th century, and eventually three of his sisters came over. He had five sisters, two stayed in Germany. And if you listen to my older brother, he loves to blow this story out of proportion, but he insists that our grandfather was a bootlegger, and but it kind of makes sense. I mean, he set one sister up in the Doylestown Inn, another one in the Pipersville Inn, and then my great aunt Bertha in the Washington Crossing Inn. So this was during Prohibition, and it was not. Serving of alcohol was not very well monitored out in Bucks County, with regards to that. But we would serve it in teapots. So, and that was still in effect when I was a kid because you couldn't drink in Pennsylvania on Sundays.
Yeah.
So the holdover from Prohibition still played out at the inn, where people would come in and want to drink, and they would pour some bourbon in a teapot for them and serve it with a glass of ice and or ginger ale, 7-Up, whatever they like to mix with their bourbon. And so that still went on, when I was a kid.
Did you ever talk to your friends and do you ever look back and think of it as you had an unusual childhood, or was it just your childhood?
I just assumed it, as my friend assumed everybody grew up like she did on a farm. I assumed everybody grew up like I did. And there was all these bizarre people walking in and out of their home, really. As if you go to the inn, Washington Crossing Inn now, the portion where we lived in is now been made into dining rooms and small little meeting rooms. So, and it is a great. They've really done a good job with it. It's I enjoy going back there. Alex, the present manager, is just a sweetheart of a guy, and it doesn't disappoint me to go back there at all, which I do go back. I have one of my best friends in high school. It's sort of a middle point between his house, and I now live in Center City, Philadelphia, a midway point between our two places. So we generally will meet there for lunch.
Nice. That's awesome. What you talk about all these cast of characters. You had a crazy bunch. What do you think is the most unforgettable character that came across into the inn?
Well, again, going back to these days, I was very young. So although these people were over the top, I don't remember their names, and everything. I do have the guest register for the inn from people who spent the night there from 1936 through 1963.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
So there's some very interesting names in there. And interesting thing about that is I don't know if, you run any kind of an establishment where people are shacking up, so to speak. Do you have the even 50 years later, do you have the freedom to go ahead and say who they were? I know there was a lot of lunch crowd that was very loud and boisterous, and again, these men, they're all men, for the most part, would come in and who had businesses in New Jersey, or would come in and do the old 3 martini lunch and get bombed and go back to work. Those are the days, and
those are the days you could.
Yeah. And then the Trenton's right up the road, so or down the road. So a lot of over the years, my dad would set aside our family dining room as a private dining room for the governors who would come up, and they were, entertaining people, and they preferred to cross over the bridge into Morrisville rather than drive them through West Trenton, and look at all the crappy parts of their city, and then drive them up the Pennsylvania side to the inn for private dining room lunch. It was fun to see the big Cadillacs come in, and people get out.
It's still the way too, because you see people, they'll even avoid the toll. They'll come over to Morrisville and take River Road, for the scenery. You saw a lot of time, a lot of seasons, and you had a lot of stories, haunting stuff like that. And unfortunately, Aunt Bertha passed away upstairs. Anything ever scare you as a kid, growing up in the inn?
I can't think of anything that really did. Again, the employees were just so. I mean, I was their little golden boy, So I got away with everything. Great Aunt Bertha really adored my little brother and my older brother, and kind of didn't pay much attention to me and my sister, and so we were kind of her outcasts. I scared me. I mean, she scared me. So that way, if anything scared me, she did. You didn't want to cross her, but as I say in the book, she did pass away at that point in my life, and
right before dinner
which was right before Easter dinner, and it as I can't say as much as I was thrilled to see her out of my life. It really did change the dynamics of living at the inn. It didn't, not so much. My father worked constantly. He would, even before I was born, he worked nonstop in the inn, and it was had guest rooms, so he would be up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure if anybody was spending the night, they had breakfast. The bar was often open till midnight and 1 o'clock. So that was his hours. He could, literally only get 5 hours sleep a night. And every afternoon, the inn was closed from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. So he would take a 2-hour nap then. And that was his lifestyle. And that was his lifestyle prior to Aunt Bertha passing away. So that didn't change that much. I think it changed a lot for my mother because, as I point out, these Zettlers, these 3 Zettler women were, if you'd married into the family, you were, I mean, this is really true in a lot of immigrant families. The people who marry into the family are not nearly as respected by the elders as the people who are really born into the family. Yeah. And so both my father's brother, my uncle, died shortly after I was born. So his wife just got out of there as quickly as she could because she wasn't a Zettler, and she was being treated horribly by Great Aunt Bertha, whose last name was Haven, but she was a Zettler. That's what she did. And then after she died, my father's mother moved into the inn. I had never met this woman. So I was 7, 8 years old, and she just showed up one day, and I said, who knew I had another grandmother? I mean, I knew my mother's mother, but it was a wonderful woman, but I never met my grandmother until all of a sudden I saw her in the kitchen in the inn one day. And it's like, what?
Who are you?
And we just hit it off like instantly. We were 2 skinny Germans. She immediately mistook me for her other son, my father's brother, who was dead at this point, because I guess I've always been told I looked exactly like him. So she thought all of a sudden her deceased son had come back as a kid.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, like the connection. And again, Aunt Bertha wasn't fond of you or your sister, but your younger ones. You also grew up in Hollywood type of thing. You moved your way up in Hollywood and writing scripts and all this stuff. If this book was turned into a movie or a play or whatever, who would you want for Aunt Bertha?
Well, I love Meryl Streep, and I think she could do a great job with it. I mean, it's not an attractive character, and Meryl's a very pretty woman, but she would do a bang up job with it. I don't think the book it lends itself to a feature film at all. I could see it as a TV series because it's very episodic.
Yeah,
things happen, day to day.
Yeah,
little stories, and so I think it could work as a the Wonder Years, but younger.
Yeah,
a younger child than the kid on the Wonder Years.
Fred Savage.
Yeah, right. Fred Savage. Yeah.
Yes, I like that. It's funny. I grew up in the 90s and stuff like that. So his younger brother Ben Savage with Boy Meets World was in Philly. That you relate to it. You see your stories and you see stories. You're like, oh my God, that's like me. That's it's unforgettable.
Yeah.
I pictured Aunt Bertha as the aunt from Harry Potter, very like boisterous, very mean spirited, and then
she's a large woman, very
that's kind of the thing. And then as well as for your mother, kind of like a Michelle Pfeiffer type of deal where she didn't cook, but like
that would work.
I think that again in my mind when reading the book, that's doing this sort of thing. That's what I always picture. But I also pictured a lot with the inn and the changes of Bucks County as how the development showed up, but when you also left though, you were left for the Vietnam War, you joined the Marines, you came back in different eras as well. So you left, what year did you leave for Vietnam?
I actually 49 years ago, July 25th.
Oh my
So
God. Well, happy
1960.
anniversary. Sorry about that,
Thank
but
you.
And again, thank you for your service. My
Well,
uncles served too.
it was, I didn't, I grew up with these men who had all fought in these wars. And as I point out in the book, they had tattoos. One guy was missing a couple fingers that he lost in Iwo Jima. And I thought, as a kid, this was just beyond cool. This was like John Wayne right there, in your house, all the time. And all these guys who would come and drink at lunch were all, one of them had gone in on D-Day. They all had these stories. And as I also point out in the book, that the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware was
painting.
right there in the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
And I would look at it all the time. And that's, then you get George Washington, doing this courageous stuff, crossing the frozen Delaware River, So it was all around me. So it just seemed like, I was 18, and it just seemed like that was the thing to do. And as I point out in the book, the whole idea of war scared me to death. I mean, and I wasn't certain at the time in 1967 that joining the Marine Corps meant I was going to Vietnam. It didn't really dawn on me. I mean, I'm 18 years old. You just don't. You're actually not reading the news enough to you're keeping up with the news. Not like today where everybody's, online and they know what's going on in Iran and this and that. We just, I hate to use the cliche. We just looked at the uniform and said, yeah, I can sign on for that, But they really did. The Marine Corps did really fast track me to Vietnam. I was in Vietnam less than 6 months after I showed up in boot camp. So it was really, and I knew in boot camp I got orders to Vietnam in boot camp. So it was like, whoa, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it was an error, and I went to Council Rock. Quite a number of my classmates and other students went to Vietnam, did not make it home. I believe Council Rock, I think there was 13 students died in Vietnam, my Council Rock. But it was one of those things, you either went to college or you went into the service. That was the attitude back then.
Yeah. And
I couldn't see myself. Well, one thing with the Marine Corps, I was able to get a 3-year enlistment rather than a 4-year enlistment, which was the Navy and the Air Force. It was 4 years. And of course, when you're 18, 1 year just sounds like an eternity. So you're definitely going to go with a 3-year gig rather than a 4-year gig.
Yeah. What was it like coming out? And what was,
That was, well, I guess 4 books ago, Careless Love is the title of the book.
Yeah.
Was dealing really more with the coming home aspect of Vietnam, not so much the war itself, but what people had to deal with coming home, and not so much the I hate to say the abuse we took, but we did, and doesn't really deal with that. It deals more with the emotional thing. I mean, you leave. I was there for 17 months, and the normal Marine Corps tour is 13 months, but I stayed an extra 4 months. So when I came home, I had been with the platoon longer than anybody else.
Yeah. And
so you're kind of the old man, 20 years old, not old enough to drink, to buy a beer or to vote. But when you come home, I was the old man of the platoon. And as much as you wanted to get out of there, you really felt you were deserting these guys because they counted on you for some sort of advice in situations, especially if the person just got there. So there's that emotional difficulty that I had. And then when I landed, it was in December of 1968. I landed in Travis Air Force Base outside of San Francisco. They took us into the San Francisco airport. I had a ticket to Philadelphia, military standby ticket, which you, of course, have to wear your uniform to take advantage of. And I handed it to the woman at the TWA counter, and she looked at it and she tossed it back on the counter, and it slid across the counter and fell off the counter at my feet. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, "It's Christmas and an awful lot of people are paying full fare, so you're just going to have to wait your turn, fella." That was the first thing someone said to me when I got
That's
back
nice.
from Vietnam.
That's nice and lovely. That's a way to get treated. Listen, you're talking about emotional. Was there one chapter in the book that was the most emotional to you?
Well, I think, yeah, after visiting my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had an apartment in Germantown in Philadelphia, the doorman used to, I don't know, I really want to say this word, but I mean, he was, I went down, I had got locked out of the apartment, so mm-hmm. It was a bizarre situation, but I went down to get a hot dog, and he warned me not to cross over Lincoln Drive mm-hmm. to get a hot dog. And basically I said, "No kidding. I mean, no, I'm not going to walk across Lincoln Drive. I get squashed." And he said, "No, because the black people are taking over Germantown." And he didn't say black people. He used a derogatory term, which I had never heard before, because I was essentially, one of the people who really raised me was Dave Redding, who was African-American and a wonderful guy. We would go fishing together.
The groundskeeper, right?
Snapping turtles together that we would bring back to the end. They'd make snapper soup out of them. He really taught me a lot about what's right and wrong. But anyway, I had never heard the N-word before. Mm-hmm. So I got in the car with my mother and asked her what it meant. And she went through the roof and said, who'd you hear that from? And she did fortunately not a U-turn on Lincoln Drive, but she turned around, went back, and really reamed this guy out for using that kind of language around me. And so it was, I just didn't realize that type of thing went on. We were really very well insulated in Bucks County. I can't say all parts of Bucks County, but at least where I was, this racism was not really prevalent. As I said, a lot of gay people came down to stay at the inn. This homophobia was not a happening thing at the inn, and I think for a large part in Bucks County, at least in that corridor between New Hope and Washington Crossing, Lambertville, New Jersey, that it was kind of a no big deal. I mean, obviously a very liberal portion of the county, but anyway, we were very protected from this type of racism and homophobia that was certainly around in those days.
Yeah. This book isn't just like nostalgic. It's also like talk about like some heavier issues like alcoholism, inequalities, unseen burdens that the adults had. Like, is this to you a growing up story, or is it more about understanding your parents and, understanding the adults in the story?
I mean, this segment, I don't think I learned anything particularly earth-shattering about my parents, because I knew what they were, what their lifestyle was. It was, as you said, just saturated with alcohol, and that was, of course, the family business. It was, the money in a restaurant is made through the alcohol. The food is not your cash cow. The booze is, and there was no drinking and driving. I forget it. That was that was rampant. And interesting, though, with and I'm not in no way condoning drinking and driving, but I think most of these people weren't joyriding as teenagers drinking. They were adults. They had fought in World War II.
Yeah.
They again, I'm not condoning drinking and driving at all, but they knew that if they had too much to drink, you drive 15 miles an hour until you get home, and make sure you stay on the road.
Yeah. So we're going to do a little segment that we do at the end of it, and this is going to be more towards the Washington Crossing end. We could throw in the Pipersville Inn and Doylestown Inn if you want. What was one of your favorite childhood meals from the inn?
Well, the inn prided itself on roast duck, and I really loved the roast duck. It was one of those things I couldn't have in the kitchen. But I know from being a busboy, clearing tables, and you come back, and if somebody didn't eat the leg of their duck, I would eat it. I would get in the kitchen, break this thing off, and
Why
eat
not?
the leg of the duck. To this day, my wife and stepkids are constantly begging me to roast a duck.
There you go.
But we do, and I'm not sure how they do the roast duck at the end now, but my father was just totally against putting any sweet orange sauce on it or cherry sauce or anything. It was always just straight roast duck, nice crispy skin, and so more like a you would get in a Chinese restaurant, duck. But that was I was, we would have shrimp cocktails, and I, as a kid, they would be set up ahead of time in the refrigerator. There was just a little cup and some lettuce and a hot sauce and 6 shrimp. And I remember I used to always go in and just steal one of the shrimps and then rearrange the 5 shrimps so it looks like it wasn't missing. But it was just like,
There should be 6 here. Why is there 5?
Yeah.
Growing up in the inn in Bucks County in the 50s, what was your favorite season growing up during that time? Was it because Washington Crossing in the wintertime is absolutely beautiful?
well, I liked Christmas, as I point out in the book, that my birthday is a few days before Christmas, and I whine about this gift is for Christmas and birthday together.
Close, yeah.
So I do whine about that in the book. But my dad would always move a HO train set into the lobby of the inn, and that was always great fun. And the inn would be decorated, for Christmas and everything. It was always very, very exciting time. And as a kid, you're anticipating Christmas, but all of the holidays really were a lot of fun. Thanksgiving and Easter, despite the fact
I was saying Easter something a little bit despite Aunt Bertha. So
despite my great aunt dies on Easter, and then in the summer things really slowed down because the holidays, like it was Decoration Day back then, was people would have hot dogs in the backyard. They didn't go out to dinner, and Labor Day, a lot of people went down to the shore as our family did. But Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day was always super busy. I mean, as much, again, as I suggested, the kitchen was absolute pandemonium on these days, which it was. There was something fun about the pandemonium. It was like running an obstacle course, and you had to make sure you didn't get run over by a waitress.
Yeah, dodging waitresses. Yes. I was reading it and I was thinking, that reliving your childhood is always something special. What do you think is one day in the book that you would like to relive again? I know it's a tough one. I'm sorry. This is what I thought of when reading it. So.
Well, I think, although I was yanked away from it at an early stage, I think I would have, in the book I explained, they did do the reenactment of George Washington crossing the Delaware every year. That at the time of this book, that reenactment was just 3 years old. They had only been doing it for 3 years. And on George Washington's birthday, everybody at the inn back then would dress up in colonial costumes. Everybody. I had a little colonial costume, and I would open and close the door, and the waitresses all dress up in costumes, and the bartenders, not the kitchen help, but anybody who was out front without costume. My brothers, me, my sister, my mom, my dad. So my dad had all these costumes. So one year, he and some of his crazy friends decided that St. John Terrell, who played George Washington in the early days of the reenactment, decided that they needed a little comeuppance. So they decided to dress up as Hessians and come from the other side and attack George Washington. And so my dad had all these costumes, and they asked one of his friends duck boats they took out, and he refused to leave the motor on the duck boat because he felt that would make them look foolish, as if they didn't look foolish enough doing what they were doing.
They're already Hessians,
and
so
they started out with a bottle of Johnny Walker Red Label Scotch and with shotguns, and everybody saying, "You're going to shoot them." So now we're going to shoot over their heads. Well, there was no blanks. They were shooting buckshot, so they were, but then it was a lot of fun. Everybody was into it. Then my mother saw that it was definitely going to go south, and she dragged us all inside. But it was. I would have loved to have sat to see the end of it, but I they definitely. They didn't kill anybody.
Thank God. Yeah, that would have rewrote the war. The day Christmas Day and the Hessians win. That's not, it's like
I still really, when two of my stepkids live in New York, and if I go to the Metropolitan Museum, I have to go see George Washington crossing the Delaware. The painting, it's just really so evocative, And so it's the greatest piece of art in the world. I don't know, but it's a great painting.
Is it still in the Methodist Church?
No, I think I haven't been in there. I think they may have done a reproduction and put it in there,
Yeah.
but the original is now up in New York City. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't walked in there lately, but when reading the book, I was like, oh, I have to check this out. So,
Yeah. No, but I really did as a kid. I just would walk if I was bored. I would just go down there and stare at it. I mean, I was enamored of these guys.
Well, I mean, it was a touch of history that that you lived in. You lived in the area. It was right there at your feet, and it was something that.
And I didn't really get it out of my blood because several years ago I did walking tours in Philadelphia in the historic area in my George Washington costume.
Oh, nice!
So
you brought the costume back. So,
yeah.
Well, this year you got to come back to Washington Crossing, and we'll freeze our butts off. And I love the funny thing is, it's and my wife and I were talking about this, is that when they're sent off guns and cannons and all this stuff, and they say like, it's coming, like there's still people from all over across the like all the United States and across the world that come to Washington Crossing to see this, and then they get scared of like the musket fire or the cannon, again. This same thing with like some of the parades. They're loading muskets. It's nothing like rapid fire or like it's coming. It's the funniest thing, but I guess we're used to it more living in this area. We grew up with this. We know this story a million times.
But back then there were really only like 30 or 40 people that showed up for it.
Yeah, it's a production now.
Yeah,
it's a big old production now. Listen, if you had 5 more minutes with your 7-year-old self, 7.5. What do you think you'd talk to about?
Well, I have to give that a little thought. I was happy with the kid I was because I did have this way of looking at the absurdity of things that were going on around me. But I don't know that I would want to tell myself to understand what's going on better. But it would be nice to have really understood, which I did obviously after going to Vietnam, understand what was going through the minds of the men who worked in the kitchen and who had literally gone in on Iwo Jima and these places, and to recognize be a little more aware of what they had gone through rather than just thinking their tattoos were cool and because some of them were really hardcore alcoholics and we would throw the empty liquor bottles out or put them out at the end of the night, and some of them would just go down there and take the dregs of all the liquor bottles and try to pour them all together just to get one shot out of them.
Yeah.
So I kind of wish I had a better understanding of what they were going through.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, my uncles did not come back the same as they did before from Vietnam, and as most people. Some people don't even come back.
Well, as I mentioned in the book, my dad had really, he knew that my 2 brothers and sister had no interest in spending their lives at the inn, and because I was in the kitchen, and throughout high school I worked in the kitchen. I worked busboy. I worked all the time at the inn and enjoyed it. I enjoyed the people. The employees, and mostly it was behind the scenes kitchen, but I really enjoyed the people. I love them, and my dad saw that, and he was definitely grooming me to take over the inn, and I mentioned that in the book. But I think, and he had known, he was in the Navy in the Pacific, and he had known and seen many Marines who had come off of these islands and seen that they're changed individuals. And once I joined the Marine Corps, I mean, he said, "Why didn't you join the Navy?" Because he was in the Navy. But I think he realized when he knew I had orders to Vietnam, I think he knew that I was not going to come back.
Yeah, he knew you weren't going to come back to the inn. Is that, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, you lived a hell of a life, and this is a hell of a story. And you know, I'm excited to dig into more about, you know, like Tick 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 and other books. I'm definitely excited to dive into them, and I think that more people will understand not only reading this, but as a look back of 1950s, of you in the inn, but also a little bit of a nod to Bucks County. And we really appreciate this. I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast.
Well, there is a lot of just to warn people, there is a lot of laugh out loud stuff in it. So it's not a depressive.
No, it wasn't depressive at all. But again, there are some ports where it's like, oh crap, Aunt Bertha died. So, you know, oh crap, this. But, you know, I liked it a lot, and I think that a lot more people will look at it. And if you want to read a little bit more about this book was great. And Steve gave it to me. Thank you so much. And you make sure you guys check it out. Steve Zettler's book, you know, Leave the Kid Alone, A Fractured Remembrance. Again, it's not fractured because of bad times, but a little bit of the Rocky Boulder. That was cool. And Steve, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Oh no, thank you for having me.
Yeah, but guys, remember, check out this book. I got the advanced copy. You can't have mine, but you can go wherever. And also check out Steve's other books. Again, I'm going to check out Tick Tick Tick. The crossword puzzle, like that, murders.
Yeah. My wife and I wrote 12 mysteries.
Yeah.
With crossword puzzles in it. I mean, I do have a website, so it's just my name.com, stevezettler.com.
Yes.
And so all of the books are listed there if anybody wants to.
He beat me to it. I was just going to say, go check out stevezettler.com. Thank you, Steve, for coming on to the podcast. And guys, remember, check out this episode.
Thank you,
check out Steve's website and check out the book. And thank you so much for joining Bucks Co-Living. Thanks for joining the podcast today. If you want to hear more, click the link below and check out our other episodes. If you're looking to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me, DM me, whatever you need to do. I'd love to hear your voice. I'd love to share your stories. Have a good one.